Hitting 105.7 The Fan, turning up Tuesday. Little motley crew, chosen by the people. 410-583-1057. Plaza 4 text lines, how you make your suggestions. And Cordell Woodland's back at the station. He'll make it happen for you. Bob Haney, Vinny Serrato, NCAA tournament. Final four will be finalized tonight. Maryland not part of the equation as they were bounced a little more than a week ago by Alabama. Joining us now to talk about that and other things happening in regards to hoops at Maryland sports. Covered the Terps for a long time for the Baltimore Sun. Still very much active in the world of sports media. Let's welcome back to the program. He's Don Markus. Don, good morning.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Doing all right. And before we get to the Terps and the tournament and all that fun stuff, Len Bias fandom. Len Bias, of course, we know the tragic star-crossed story of his life, but he played in four of these things, made it to the Sweet 16 twice in 84 and 85, was inducted into, and rightfully so, College Basketball Hall of Fame. Talk about Len Bias fandom and how people can, reminisce and, share their love, if you will, for, one of the great players in the history of the ACC and college basketball.
Yeah, I'm working with Dave Ungrady, who wrote a great book back in around 2010-11, Born Ready, The Mixed Legacy of Len Bias. And we've been working on a documentary, but first we're working on a podcast that we're going to be doing with iHeartRadio, and we're doing a fandom page on the 34. You can get access on 34+1 campaign, and it's a promotional vehicle for the fandom page and for our podcast. Leading up to the podcast is hopefully going to run between the June 19th, day, marking the anniversary, 35 years since Len passed away, and his induction in the Hall of Fame out in Kansas City in November, late November, I think it is. And that's going to be several part series. We already started talking to some interesting guests. I talked to Gary Williams yesterday. I'm going to be talking to some other people, tied into his legacy, where, Dave and I are going to be doing that. And this fandom page, because so many people still, when you go to Maryland games, you see, well, not this year, but in past years, you see people wearing Bias jerseys. ESPN did a 3-hour special on Len Bias last year. He's still, when talking to Gary Williams yesterday, Gary said he's become this mythical figure, and in part because of the fact that passed away before he really reached his potential and possibility of being a rival to Michael Jordan. We'll never know if that would ever happen, but he was certainly going in that direction. So, it's really exploring the life, legacy, and death of Len Bias.
I have, by the way, that life-size poster down in my base. It's not hanging in the basement, but I have it downstairs. We're in that yellow number 34 Maryland uniform. Don Markus joining us, Vinny and Haney, 105.7 The Fan. And as we transition into the current state of Maryland hoops, they did make the tournament. They did win a game. Were dismissed by Alabama, who was just on fire that night. But a lot talked on, and you covered Mark Turgeon for 9 years with the Sun about his long-term future here at the University of Maryland, and he has his fans for sure, and maybe some big money fans at that, but he has his share of detractors in the fan base, the people that pay to watch the games at the Xfinity Center and watch them on TV. I mean, what do you think the state of Maryland basketball is right now, and will Mark Turgeon be part of the future of Maryland hoops?
There's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of silence right now, and I think Damon Evans was sort of, hoping that the women, for many reasons, hoping that the women's team kept going in its tournament, and obviously the Lady Terps lost, against Texas the other night. So now the decision is out there for him to make about Mark Turgeon, and I even though I'm not working anymore, I still talk to a couple of boosters here or there, and even they're not sure what's going to happen. So, the indications is that he and his staff are still, or the reports are that he and his staff are still recruiting, and acting as if they're going to be there, which they should do. But we don't know. But I think a decision has to be made, and not only a decision, but I think they have to figure out if they want to continue with Mark, not just for the next 2 years of his contract, but extended beyond that, and with a real extension, not a long term, but just a real extension where there's, obviously he's going to be the coach for those 4 years or 5 years, or they just have to make a decision and move on. And I don't know if they're in the financial position. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with that. Obviously, the pandemic and how much money Maryland and a lot of schools lost because of it impacts those decisions, but they have to figure out which way to go and make a decision so they could take advantage of the transfer portal, which has become basically a place for coaches to shop for players and reconfigure their teams, as a lot of teams have done that are still in the tournament. So I think it's important that decision for Maryland basketball has to be made as quickly as possible.
Don, I think one of the biggest issues, like if I'm Damon Evans, and we have him on the show every Thursday, and the recruiting. The recruiting, 80th and 25th the last 2 years, the recruiting has not lived up to Maryland standards. That to me is the biggest problem. I think Turge did a great job coaching, but it's his own fault because he had to coach what he had to coach, because he didn't go get better players.
That and the fact that they talked all season, and it wasn't talked or written about a lot, but I thought about it and watched these games and sort of followed what these guys were doing. They talked about their lack of size all year, their lack of a big man, and obviously, the kid from Alabama came with limited credentials, and he looked like he played hard, but he wasn't a factor really for that team. And Joel Mariel, who they were taking a flyer on, at the point where they thought they could take a flyer on him because they had a lot of good big men in the program at that point. He has not panned out, whether it's physical or mental or both or whatever, and he has not progressed. So a year ago, when you knew Sticks was leaving to go to the NBA, that was a given, and they had already lost the Mitchell twins. They had two other guys on the roster who were serviceable players, and one guy maybe even more than serviceable in Ricky Lindo, and did not get much of a chance, was in and out of the doghouse for most of the 2019-20 season, and transferred to GW. And at GW, in a limited window of opportunity, because he sat out thinking he was going to take the year as a transfer, but then was able to play the second half of the year. They had a long, pause, GW did. But in 7 games, he averaged like 11 points and 10 rebounds. And as a 6'8", 6'9", long, good defender. And I kept watching that team, Maryland, play this year, thinking, what would that team look like with Ricky Lindo? Now, they wouldn't have been at the top of the league, but I don't think they would have struggled the way they did in certain games. And they might have had a better shot against, Alabama. Who knows? But I think that, it's a situation where they're not getting the talent that he's gotten before. And now you're in a position where coaches are recruiting against Maryland, telling them that Mark's not even going to be there. And so that's why it's imperative for them to make this decision and also to pick up their recruiting.
Now, Don, let's just say if Turge and Damon can't get it worked out, who are a couple of names that you think would be viable candidates for the Terps?
I have always, I was and still am, even though he's not coaching. I'm a big John Beilein fan. I know he's 68 years old, but I think that you need somebody who's going to excite the fan base, whether it's a hot up and coming coach or an established coach, or you need someone who's going to excite the fan base, not just with his name, but what they're going to do. Because right now the fan base is not very excited about the style of play, about the inconsistency of performance there. So you need somebody in terms of up and down kind of seasons. The results are usually, the end results are decent. He gets to the tournament. But I think Maryland fans want more. So you look at a John Beilein who's sitting out there and I think has made it apparent that he wants to coach again. And his former assistant, DeAndre Haynes, is on Mark's staff. So there would be a guy who could, be a good transition guy with the players if Mark were to leave or if they were to fire Mark. And, so that's one guy that I think they should look at. Andy Enfield, who out at USC, I don't know if they could get him, but he's an East Coast guy. He went to Hopkins. He graduated. He was he was a graduate student at Maryland, and he's a hot commodity and plays up tempo. He did I forget what they call Lob City at Gulf Coast when he was coming up, and still playing that game at USC. And the other possibility is hiring someone with Maryland ties. I don't know if they would go after a Juan Dixon, or somebody like that, or Walt Williams or somebody like that. But that's the other possibility. They have to get somebody who's going to excite the fan base because, Mark's a nice guy. He's done a good job. He's run a successful, clean program. Kids graduate, but there's no excitement right now about Maryland basketball.
Don Markus, Vinny and Haney, 105.7 The Fan. Don, some good stuff. We appreciate your time. We'll talk to you next week, talk more about this Len Bias fandom and all the honors that we're going to bestow upon the College Basketball Hall of Famer, rightfully so.
Thanks, guys.